One. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. I am here with a friend, um, Alex Ortiz. He is um, a mentor. Um, he is an awesome father, educator. Um, he is so profound in so many different ways, and he's caring. So all that he has, not just as an intellectual, but his wisdom. I want the world to be able to have some of it too, right? If you have a light, you don't want to hide it. So as much as I want to be greedy and have this brother to myself, um, there's no amount of like requests that he could ask of me where I won't say no. I won't get you coffee because he's done the same for me. Literally, when I was hungry, he fed me. Even though I was in denial. I mean, that's how caring, wonderful he is. And so I pray that other people who may be different or similar just can get affirmation um, from this wonderful brother. So, Alex, welcome to the podcast. Uh,
Thank you, sir.
so
Appreciate it.
one of the prerequisites of having you on is what you have to. We're doing a show and tell of a favorite shirt, jacket, sweatshirt. What do you have on, and what's the reasoning behind it?
Yeah. No, first off, I just want to say thank you for inviting me on to get a chance to speak with you. And wow, what an intro. Super appreciate that. It's been a blessing to be able to have a friendship with you, and you grow in a relationship and us being able to connect regularly. So thank you for that. Appreciate the affirmation. Appreciate the words that you said, that you've spoken, whether I've lived them out already or still continue to grow in them. I appreciate what you said. Um, as far as my most favorite thing to wear, I mean, you're literally probably seeing what I will wear for those of you that are watching, almost on a weekly basis. I have a very simple wardrobe. In fact, I think I stole this jacket from one of my kids because I shop so little for myself.
Mm,
But
mm,
one of the things I do on a regular basis is I try to work out, and then immediately jump into serving, whether that's serving in my job, whether that's serving with my family, whether that's serving with the community. And so I try to keep things really, really simple. My gym clothes is one outfit. It's a t-shirt and some shorts. And oftentimes I'll just recycle that same t-shirt with a pair of jeans for the rest of the day. And yeah, so that's my favorite. It's a real simple simple technique to keep myself healthy.
yeah.
Uh, the gym is therapy for me, but then it prepares me for being able to
Mm.
operate in the positions that that God has me in, and wherever I'm gonna serve in.
You are a man of many talents and many interests. Uh, and you don't have to stop at one. What are the things that you are passionate about?
Yeah. I mean, I think one area. Let me first start off by saying that um, family for me is a huge area of my time. I think when you
Mm,
think about passions, there are things that we like, and then there are things we spend time with,
mm,
and not both of those things always equal, passion. And so you talk about one thing in the way that we like them, but you show it in the way that you spend time with them.
mm,
And so one of the areas that I will say just time-wise is my family is an area of passion. I really, really enjoy getting a chance to share in my kids' sports activities. I love being a part of their lives. Sometimes we'll sit around and play board games. We run into this really fun game um, uh, called oh my gosh, I can't remember what. It's a phrasing game where you get like
mm.
these little magnetic tiles, and the challenge is it gives you a create a quote for a famous person who I don't know, was recently featured on the cover of whatever, and then you get these 75 tiles of words, and we fill them out, and you got a minute to prepare a quote. Anyway, so those kinds of games are really exciting for us. It gives us a chance to think. But all that to say, like my family is one of a big passion for me.
Mm.
Being able to one thing that I did do growing up is invest in myself and invest in,
Mm,
just, and I don't mean money, I just mean
yeah.
my time.
Mm,
I think oftentimes like when you're um, when you're striving to kind of in some cases show off, prove that you
yeah.
belong somewhere, you work,
Mm,
your tail off to impress other people. And I
yeah.
spend a lot of my time doing that. And in my era where I'm in my life right now, I want to make sure that I'm taking care of me, and that includes my
Mm,
health. That includes my spiritual well-being. So I try to make sure that I call it therapy time at the gym
yeah.
and my time with the Lord.
Right.
I got Jesus and the gym. And so those are two areas of
Yeah.
mine that, if you think about from a time-wise perspective,
Mm,
I pour my passions into. There's those two additional areas.
yeah.
And then just my time-wise, my job.
Yeah.
I manage and lead a team of folks, and I love coaching, love mentoring. I love being able to pour into folks. And so one passion of mine is seeing folks grow.
Mm.
And so I spend time in my regular day-to-day job coaching from a leadership position at where I'm at.
Uh, in regards to you touched about investing in yourself and you reflected on how you didn't do that so much before, now you're doing it now. Um, along the same lines with your family, thanks for sharing like how you have that communal time. Was it I don't want to say natural, was it automatic? Like
Mm.
how'd you get there in establishing um with the wife and kids like, oh, this is how we're going to do things. Or was it always like that? Did you all automatically vibe and click?
It
How'd you
wasn't
get
always
there?
like that. Yeah, my
Mm,
family didn't. I didn't grow up in a family where we had that kind of time. I give a ton of credit to my wife,
mm,
who um, is very intentional about what um, what vision she has for what our family should look like. And one of those visions is spending time with each other. A theme that we have for 2024 that we, as a married couple and as a family, have
yeah,
started reiterating to ourselves is what we want to do is just be more intentional. It's a theme that we've like brought over from 2023 and other years, but really just trying to make an effort. Um, to give you some context, my oldest son is a junior in high school. My
mm,
youngest son is a freshman in high school. And, we realistically, this era of our lives is moving rapidly. My oldest will be graduating from high school real soon. My youngest is not far from that as well. And so 3, 4 years from now, they won't be living with us.
yeah,
They'll be under whatever influences I've given them at that point, but
yeah,
they're going to be making their decisions. And so this is a chance for us to be able to be very, very intentional about how we spend time with our kids, what we're doing with them, how we teach them how to have family life, where we teach them how to be vulnerable with each other and with ourselves. And having a freshman and a junior, those are those are two not always moments in your life where you want to be vulnerable with your parents and trust them, and
mm,
and you deal with
yeah,
so much transition and so much growth.
mm,
So it wasn't, to answer your original question, this isn't a natural thing. It's very
okay,
intentional.
yeah,
And it's, something that it's important to our family. Um, and it's something that we've grown to learn to do. And realistically, growing and learning how to do it all the time.
yeah,
It's not like we just say, okay, well, we love playing board games, so that's what we do, and
right,
that's our intentional time. Our likes change, our
mm,
interests change. My kids sometimes like just showing off some really
mm,
silly like Instagram or TikTok videos, and we can probably
yeah,
spend a good half hour
yeah,
to hour
yeah,
just looking at funny videos, right? So, but that's their time where they get to share it with us, and so
yeah,
just finding creative ways of being able to do that while also having time where
yeah,
we're no devices,
yeah,
face to face, talking with each other. Prayer time is really important to us. So every night we pray, we ask
yeah,
each other where we're at, check in, and then use that as a basis for prayer for one another to know where we're at. And then that sets us up for knowing what to be asking for the following day, or what it is that we each of us might need to give
mm,
to each other when our intentional time does become a thing that's on the schedule that we can actually do.
yeah. No, no, I think that's something we all need to hear, and I don't think we figured out. We just believe it's magic when we see, because again, someone who hasn't grown up, with family, I become envious right? Like, how did they do this? And so the secret sauce is, like you said, being intentional. You can't be haphazard
Yeah.
with your time. Um, and yeah, you have to put in work. And then in regards to why like be a mentor or coach? Like, how'd you get to like, was that always built into like wanting to see other people get better? Like, what's in it for you? Like, how'd you get there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually had to answer this question just earlier this week, for a different reason,
Mm,
but I have a small little mentor group, and so my role is I'm a engineering lead, so I lead the engineering department for a software company. Um, but I also am part of a diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging committee,
nice.
where I work at full time. And that's a volunteer role, but it's given me an opportunity to represent engineering, which is my career, my background, my studies, um, uh, in a um, committee that's focused on diversity,
Mm,
and vice versa. I can also represent the efforts, initiatives that the diversity committee has on the engineering organization. And the cross, the intersectionality of those two things right there,
mm,
hasn't always been the case. If you can't tell by my last
yeah,
name, I'm a Latino. My
yeah.
wife is African American. My kids are mixed, they're interracial. And for most of the beginning of my career as an engineer,
Mm,
I was the only one that looked like me,
yeah.
in the Silicon Valley. And so, in fact, I worked at a prestigious, tech company. Worked at a few, in fact, as a software engineer, and most of the people around me didn't look like me. In fact, I think I was the only person to look like me on the entire floor that I was in, and the only
Yeah.
time that I ever got a chance to connect with folks that looked like me was when I would walk down to the kitchen to get something
Yeah.
to eat.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and I told myself then, I want to see more
Mm,
people that have my background, and not exactly where I grew
yeah.
up,
Yeah.
and not
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly being a
Yeah.
Latino, but just haven't had the opportunities to be able to just say, hey, one day I want to be a software engineer and just go through the studies, because
Yeah.
it's not like for every one of us we have that level of equality
Yeah. Yeah.
to stand from. And equality doesn't mean you get the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Equality means that you get the same opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
and so being in the position that I'm in now, um, it it affords me the credibility, the place of position, the experience to be able to talk to other young men, young women of color who are either starting in their career brand new or have
Mm,
gone through it and have ran into one situation or another that I know that I've ran into before and I can speak to. And I try to do that, both from my experience as a professional, my experience as a parent, um, my experience in ministry, just from kind of various sides of those things, and really just provide more on ramps
yeah.
for people. I'm not going to give them a position necessarily and say, "Hey, I got a job for you," but I do want to give an on
Yeah.
ramp.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So I don't always have the power to be able to provide a role
Yeah.
or a job, but I do have the position to provide a an on ramping
Yeah.
discussion and relationship and networking.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because I don't know if people understand this, which is like, when you have a lot of people from a similar background, you have a similar way of solving problems. When if you have someone that comes from a different background, right? They have a different approach. And you want to include that excellence. But, if you just negate someone because of one thing, one variable, on that surface level, then you miss out, especially making money. or
Yeah.
just or or just making the work easier. We discount each other so much. Now you mentioned an engineering background. What did you specifically major in, and how did you get started um, studying that in comparison to? I mean, and also did like your background growing up give you a head start in that?
Mm. So I studied electrical and computer engineering. Um, when I first started college, I wanted to be a teacher.
Mm.
Um, yep, I wanted to actually teach math.
Sorry, this is
And
news for me, folks.
yep, I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be an educator. That was kind of like my goal.
Mm,
So first and second year of college, I started in a teacher's education program in San Diego, and was excited about the role that an educator had. Some of the biggest influencers that I had in my life were my teachers.
mm,
My parents both were hardworking, um, and each of them got as far as they got in education. My mom dropped out of junior high school. She was 14, 15 years old when she dropped out. I was born to teen parents. Both my parents were teenagers when they had me, and so they didn't have the kind of academic accolades that you know uh, some of my other peers, for example, had. I was born in Puerto Rico. This is an island in the Caribbean, and lived there. Moved to the States, and was bilingual the moment I landed here in the U.S. in the mainland. Puerto Rico, for those that aren't aware, is actually a territory of the United States. So those that are born in Puerto Rico are actually U.S. citizens and can freely travel between the island and the mainland. And early in Puerto Rico's history, at least in the 20th century, there was a big push to teach Puerto Ricans English.
mm,
So in school, I learned both English and Spanish. When I got here to to mainland, I was placed in a Spanish-speaking classroom.
mm.
Yeah, because I came from a Spanish-speaking country.
Yeah.
Um, and to my teacher's surprise, many weeks later, when she's talking English to the principal, and I responded back in English, and she said, "Wait a minute, you speak English?" I said, "Absolutely, speak English and Spanish, both very fluently." And so my um, I st like sort of I'm kind of jumping the gun a
Mm.
little bit here, but
No, no.
my background wasn't one of my parents encouraging me to um, be a lawyer or an
Yeah,
engineer
yeah.
or a doctor. My parents honestly just wanted me to graduate from high school
Mm. Yeah,
and find opportunities where I could. The advice my mom had given me is graduate from high school, don't get anyone pregnant. Basically,
yeah,
don't
yeah, yeah,
do all the things
yeah,
I didn't do.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And so that was the guidance that I had. And uh, and so my educators, my teachers, they were big influences for me because they gave me an opportunity to see something different than what my family was, um, what they knew to be truth.
Mm,
So I had an educator, a teacher who was a chemistry teacher,
mm,
Puerto Rican, um,
mm. Yeah.
and encouraged me to strive for something higher and gave me an example of what it looked like to do that. Also gave me on-ramps, also networked me with people, also connected me with programs.
Yeah.
And that teacher, Mr. Jose Jones,
Wow.
went on to help me apply for internships when I was in high school at the university, helped me to uh, build websites back in the 90s
Wow.
for organizations that I had no idea how to do. And that helped me kind of identify what I could possibly do.
Mm.
Now, I wanted to mimic him. He was a teacher, and I wanted to be a
Yeah.
teacher,
Yeah.
right? But when I finally got into the career and the study, I realized, wait, there's a um, there's a core of me that definitely wants to teach, but there's another core of me that wants to create, to build. And I explored one avenue, realized that the engineering side of what I was doing in the curriculum was what I loved, and so pursued a degree in electrical and computer engineering, and from there went on to work in the tech industry.
Oh, that's amazing. Besides the educators in your life, being awesome models for you, what would you say is a pivotal moment that has shaped who you are right now?
A pivotal moment. I had I call her my mentor now,
Yeah.
and this has been the case for a little bit. I actually originally wasn't going to go to college. My role was graduate from high school. That was it. That
Yep.
was all the that was all the
Yeah.
guidance I got from my family. Um, and most of the successful people in my family then went on to either work with the military,
Yeah.
work for the military. They were in some sort of capacity where they were serving,
Yeah.
right? Whether that was working as a private employee or as a civilian working in military or actually serving.
Yeah.
So I was set on going in the Army. I did the junior ROTC program when I was in high school from my sophomore year on to my senior year, and I was ready to enlist. Literally, I graduated from high school when I was 17 years old. My birthday's in July. Graduation was in May. And in July, when I was old enough and 18 years old to sign my
Mm.
name to go to the all that that's all that was left between me graduating and then jumping into the in the army. And a young lady, um, Miss Felita Jones, came into my high school, and young black woman, braids, um, and she said a couple of words where I was like, "Wait, what?" And these words were this: um, "Just because you can't afford to go to school doesn't mean you shouldn't go to college."
Mm.
And then she started talking about all these opportunities, about being able to get grants, scholarships.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I asked a ton of questions. I'm raising my hand, asking questions. And so after this session that she had with a group of us, she pulled me aside. She was like, "Hey, so where have you applied to? And have you applied to scholarships?" I'm like, "Well, ma'am, I don't actually plan on going to college. This is in March of my senior year." So I was like, I never applied to any colleges. I don't actually plan on going to college because I'm going into the service." And she said, "Well, do you know how stupid that is?" Um, and she paid to
Wow.
for my college applications
Wow.
to the CSU programs,
Wow. 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 Wow.
to a
Wow.
bunch of universities.
Wow.
I got into every university that I applied to, even though they were late, even though they, in some situations, I was like, "There's no way." I got into every university I applied to. Um, And yeah, she looked at my SAT score, my SAT, I had a really high SAT score. And he's like, you are wasting your mind by choosing this one career that you're thinking about going to." She's like, "Do you know how much finances and money we can just find you just off of the fact that your parents don't make a lot of money and you have this incredible score?" And so yeah, so I got applied, got into every university that she helped me apply to, and chose to study where she was at, which is at San Diego State University.
Mm. Wow. Um,
Yeah.
that's a perfect transition to the next question I have, which is when you're surrounded um with so much information, how do you determine what's true?
Mm,
Right? You have this in front of you, you have this in front of you, and then all of a sudden you have your teacher who comes up and just drops this jewel on you.
yeah,
But how do you even determine that that was right?
yeah. I think in an age where, I mean, I'll tell you this. I grew up in an age where we didn't have as readily available access to information as we do now
Yep. Yep.
in kind of modern times. And the information you got was who you trusted, and and that was it. There was not a lot of vetting process that was there. There wasn't a lot of fact checking that one as a private individual could do.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think the benefit that we have these days is that when it comes to truth, non-truth,
Yeah.
opinion, fake news, all these things, there's so many resources available for us to be able to do that, um, which is great. I think it's great. I think it's also something to be really weary and careful about.
Yeah.
The way that I evaluate, truth, um, there, I think there's a couple different things. One is trust is established. You give
Mm.
trust to folks um, because they've either earned it for some reason or because of relationship. And I think in that situation, um, it's important to lean on that. And I also want to caution with some of that because there could be that you trust folks with one area of your life that I wouldn't trust them with other areas of my life. And so just kind of recognizing Where are unique areas of my life that I can trust either information to for this, for here, but not for here.
Yeah.
And that could be difficult to separate. But I think the way that you do that is through just intuition.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm,
uh, there was a pastor who I had heard say this once before, and it's kind of stuck with me. When it comes to what you hear from people, um, eat the meat, spit out the bones. In other words, eat the truth, spit out the stuff that ain't there. Just because you don't necessarily always agree with folks, doesn't mean that what they're saying is not
mm,
true,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Not everything. There's some things that they might say is true. You know what? That's meat.
Yeah.
Use that. Eat
Yeah.
that up.
Yeah.
And anything that's not there that you don't necessarily agree with, that maybe doesn't align with your experiences, just spit those things out.
Mm,
You know, I think that ability to be able to do that, it takes a lot of practice.
yeah.
Um, and so I found this to be the case, when listening to my peers, when listening to
Yep.
my um, folks who lead
Yeah.
in roles. I may not necessarily agree, but I'm gonna make sure that I
Yeah.
find the meat in the
Yeah.
conversation, the meat in whatever it is
Yeah.
they're sharing. Just kind of spit out the stuff that doesn't
Yeah.
either apply to me, isn't relevant, um, is flat out not right, and it's just maybe their experiences with
Yeah.
stuff. And take the stuff that works for me.
Yeah.
Um, so that the intuition is the next part. So trust intuition, and the last thing is, and this is a bit of a
Mm,
Christianism portion of
yeah.
it, but it's an area where I try to focus on too. It's just like I, I'm I believe that there is a Holy Spirit who was left behind. Jesus said that I'm leaving my helper behind, and he'll be able to do greater things than I.
Mm,
And so I believe in just the ability to pray, ask the Holy Spirit, like, yo, I don't know how to do this thing. I don't know
yeah.
if this is right. I don't know what's true. I know these things are true of myself.
Yeah.
Holy Spirit, what do you
Mm,
see? Where do you need me to operate out of? And when it comes to those situations, this is really, really key when there's a challenging thing that's coming up front that I don't know that I trust
mm,
myself to
yeah.
do it. Um, something where I I don't know if this is God telling me to do this or this is
Mm,
something else telling me to do this.
yeah.
Um, and there's a pastor at Transformation Church, Mike Todd, who has wrote a book called Crazy Faith,
Mm,
and he says this thing. He's like, if you trust the Holy Spirit, just if you hear something and you're like, well, this could be 51% true, bank on that, roll with it.
mm, okay.
So I may not necessarily believe it 100%.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
51%, that's pretty good odds. Let me go ahead and take that on.
Mm,
And it's operating in a position of faith. Like I have
yeah.
enough faith, 51% faith in this thing that I'm going to go ahead and pursue
Mm,
that for something that I may trust. This isn't
mm,
information based.
mm,
This is more decision based.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
I am going to decide to do this thing, which I don't really trust myself to do just yet
Yeah.
because I don't feel like I've got the skills. I ask the people around me; they don't have experiences. Okay, God, 51%. I'm actually pretty confident in
Yeah. Yeah.
51% of being able to do this. So there's a level of being able to kind of
Yeah.
move forward in that. Not exactly answering that
Yeah.
part of the question about trust and
No. No.
information
Yeah.
wise,
Yeah.
but definitely trust in decision making process
But
that
then
is really valuable.
would you say the inverse is true then too? If 51% leans you like it's just false, right? There's even though you're tempted by it.
Yes,
Okay. Okay. Okay.
absolutely true. Yeah, I don't know about this. This smells 51%, not right. Yeah. Uh, yeah. So yeah, trust takes faith too.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Uh,
I'm pretty
yeah.
sure your faith, like especially sharing like your story with high school, and then applying to college, it was like just there's a little yeah, this might be right.
Maybe
This might
it
be
might be
right.
okay. Yeah.
But you couldn't see, right? Because it's so abstract from the world you
Yeah.
came from.
And I think a big, um, a big part of how we operate in life is our experiences we've had in the past. It puts blinders on us in some
Yeah.
cases, unfortunately. This is why diversity is so important and so valuable. It's why inclusion and equity is so important and so valuable because we grow up with these blinders that say this
Yeah.
is what the world is like. And so this is the rules, these are the boundaries. No one steps out of these boundaries
Yeah.
or rules, and therefore the decisions that I make are going to work within these boundaries and these rules.
Mm,
Now, if you're a person of power, in a position of power, in a position of making decisions for a group of folks, and you have these blinders on, and let me just kind of call it blinders. When you have these boundaries
yeah,
that
yeah.
you've set up and rules that you've set
Mm,
up for the way that you've experienced the world, um, it's really difficult to move the boundary or
yes,
even to shift it entirely, um, because you're so used to this way of operating with it.
yeah,
And I think in a lot of cases we do that because as humans, when we have boundaries, we're protected. We know this. It works well for us, um, and that works for surviving.
yeah,
But it doesn't give us the greatest view
yeah.
of what our rest of our world could need, greatest view of where we could serve. And when you include, different schools of thought, when you include a diverse experience, when you include people who have had a different boundary set up for their own lifestyle, you begin to see that maybe some of the boundaries that I had um, weren't exactly based off of a place where it's going to give the greatest influence.
Yeah.
Um, and problem solving becomes greater. Inventions become more relevant. Um, so there's a huge benefit when it comes to bringing others, a more diverse school of thought or the more diverse experience and being able to grow out those boundaries.
Jumping into that actually, what are you hoping or what are you actually seeing trending in the future of di as diversity plays a role in tech? Because
Hmm.
20 years ago, what we were seeing it looked like and what we're seeing now. Yeah. So what do you think it's looking like? What do you hope that it looks like?
Yeah, I think 20 years ago, 20 years and 30 years ago, tech was relatively new to the public,
Mm,
and everything was everything that we brought out was new, was world changing. The internet
yeah.
came out and was, massively available. It was in 1993, 94. I remember having a AOL account, right? And I was in junior high, maybe in high school, um, having an AOL account. And that was like revolutionary. The fact that I don't have to open up World Book Encyclopedia, literally flip through the pages and find out something about, how long the Tyrannosaurus Rex's arms are, and instead could just ask a forum, open up a web page,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Research, do all my research all in one spot. That's transformational. That was kind of step one, in kind of where we're at now. Um, there wasn't a niches for the technology.
Mm.
Technology was just a big thing, and you either were on it or you weren't. You know what I
Okay.
mean? And I think as we've evolved in kind of where we're at, what it's given is these various niches in technology, where um, specializations are possible, where my experience of where I've come from now becomes a niche because the group of folks that I could serve is greater, that niches exist there. I mean, I'll give you an example. Um, I didn't go to church. I didn't grow up in church. My
Mm,
experience in church was when I went to a youth group in college. I was a sophomore in college, um, a long time ago. And uh, that experience transformed who the man that I eventually will grow to be.
yeah.
I'm not there yet, but I will
Yeah.
grow to be. Um, and um, that church, uh, I stay in contact with them because I keep in contact with them through social media, through like whatever events that they're doing. But they don't know me anymore.
Mm,
Um, and and uh, I think when I then started serving, volunteering in ministry, the church that I started going to when I was grown, the way that they connected with their folks that came to the church is they would write the person's name down, phone number, maybe address on a piece of paper. Sometimes they would have them sign a membership covenant or something like that, right? And then at some point, someone would pick up a phone and be like, "Hey, Alex, how's it going? We're having this men's breakfast. Hey, Robert, we're having this event for Christmas. We'd love to have you around. We know you came 2 years ago or whatever, blah blah
yeah.
blah." And then, they close the book and they open it back up again. Obviously, technology has evolved
Yeah.
to allow for things like, a customer management system of sorts
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
churches. And that's a niche.
Hmm.
That's a niche that's available that technology is able to fill in. Um,
Hmm.
that's
Yeah.
one example of a kind of niche that exists.
Yeah.
There's so many niches right now that are available. And I think when it comes to um, uh, us as consumers, us being people of color,
Yeah.
as consumers, we have our own niches
Yeah.
that we can begin to carve out. We have our own niches that we can begin to
Mm.
influence. We have our own niches where we can start growing riches within. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
Yeah. 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 Wow.
And so if being able to find those is huge. The Latino community in particular in the US is huge.
Mm.
And then you think about the Latino community as a whole globally.
Yeah.
There's been this huge shift in music. Like I think of what Latino music was when I was growing up, and there was reggaeton music, there was salsa music, there was merengue, there was all these things. Now I listen to Korean music that has reggaeton music in it.
That's
Now I
wild.
listen, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
I was
Yeah. Yeah.
listening to a Gujarati rapper who had reggaeton beats in the background, right? And then I heard a Latin reggaeton artist with a Hindi woman
Oh, wow.
singing
Yeah.
in the background, right? And so we're like seeing this mix of culture, of influences that are growing, right? And it's amazing to me. It's to see
Mm.
the creativity that we have and being able
Yeah.
to forge these niches like this out of some base that we at some point had. And it's exciting. Like it's really exciting to see that. You'd be surprised at how much available influence is possible with just some of the things that we're just passionate about. So
Wow. We'll touch, based off the podcast because you just blew. This makes a lot of sense because I know this is happening, but anyway, yeah, 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 yeah. Now I see it. Now I see it. I don't like to use the word failure, but in regards to setbacks or stumbling blocks, how do you handle that? How do you turn that into stepping stones?
yeah, um, yeah, that's it's kind of the toughest learning is well, let me say it a different way.
Hmm.
Uh, I, I think oftentimes we think that we can only get success or we can only learn things out of success. In other
Yeah.
words, like I get an A, I've learned something. I've got a degree, I've earned something.
Mm,
Um, and I work with a lot of really smart people. You that are listening on this podcast, I probably work with some really smart people who are
yeah.
just flat out dumb. And you know what I'm saying when I'm saying it, because you can
Mm,
probably have already pictured the one person on your mind. You're like, man, they're so smart. They're so dumb
mm.
because they have gone through. And I'm making an assumption here. I'm
Yeah,
definitely
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
kind of using this as a stretched out example here. But it's like you've had people who have been so successful with a lot and haven't really experienced kind of the quote unquote real world of what it looks like. And when you and I think about real world, most of us think about real world, it's that we are going to run into opposition. We are going to run into some failure. And if you haven't run into that, either just wait, or if you haven't run into that, I want to see how you are resilient enough to operate out of that place. So I believe, and I'll tell you my experience when it comes to failure
Mm,
is I have got the biggest amount of learnings out of trying something that I was uncomfortable with,
yeah.
being being willing to fail and pick myself up from that. I studied electrical and computer engineering. That is not software, by the way.
Yeah, that's why I was like,
So
hold on. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, so for those of you that don't that I didn't fill this in, I am a software engineer by trade, but I'm a learned electrical and computer engineer, and so electrical circuits, VLSI design. I did an internship at a microchip company. So my stints in what I learned were all around math and electronics. They
Mm,
were not around computer programming, specifically software engineering. Um, and so, but but I had an interest in creating something that I could see right away. Electrical
Mm,
design for me took a really long time. It was expensive.
okay.
Like if I wanted to build something, I had to pay extra money to find the right parts, to find the space to be able to um,
Mm,
build something within. And when I was in college, I realized, shoot, I can just write a program and it does something right there for me, right on my computer. I don't have to wait. I don't have to have any more space than just my computer. And I failed a ton. Oh my gosh, the number of times that I would try something out and I would almost literally be bashing my head at the keyboard because it didn't work, were astronomical. Um,
mm,
but it forges something within you when you fail
yeah,
to know that the next time I run into a challenge, I can learn
yeah,
it.
yeah,
I'm gonna get past this. If I can get past that, I can get past this. That's a mantra. I feel like for me is where if I have gotten past that thing, if
yeah,
I'm able to have had failure and still be resilient enough to go through that,
yeah,
I can most certainly go through this. And the bar levels up just a little bit.
yeah,
It just ratchets it up just a bit. Yeah, the gym is probably my most relevant experience. I only started working out a year ago. And in the year, I've lost 35 pounds. I've gained muscle. I'm able to do a bunch of stuff in the gym I never was when I first started. When I first started in the gym, I went to go lift some what looked like light weights on Instagram. If you've ever been on Instagram and you've seen someone work out, they'll pick up these big old heavy weights and they're just pushing, but they look like little weights. So I was like, those are simple. What's a 25-pound dumbbell? That's really nothing. Let me go ahead and start bench pressing this. And I go to lay down on this bench and I try to push 25 pounds of a dumbbell and I'm like, wow, this is hard. And I will fail miserably. But that failure pushes you to then like grow, to
yeah,
strengthen, to try different things so that you can come back and say, well, where am I at now?
yeah,
A year later, you failed a bunch of times, but over time, you
yeah,
start seeing progress. And I think if you take the opportunity to see failure as a chance to grow, as a
yeah,
chance to learn from, it'll make you more resilient, make you stronger.
yeah,
You'll see in time, over time, that little percentage of growth leads to massive
yeah,
growth over time. It's just like an interest rate.
yeah, yeah. I think nowadays with so much comparison, and I'm not going to blame social media. Just it doesn't have to be social media, right? We could just look at our peers or whatever. We tie our benchmarks to us.
Mm,
Um, versus when you encounter stumbling blocks over and over again, it's just work. But the beauty of it is when the work is fun, and it's just a product. It's not you, right? And that problem solving, like that, or putting together that puzzle, it's just so entertaining. But we lose sight of that when we make it more, when we make it too much.
yeah.
Um, what advice would you give to someone starting out in your field? Or
Yeah.
how about especially a person that may not look like they would fit in?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I think when it comes to engineering in general, it is a craft-based um,
Mm,
field. We are builders. We are engineers, but the reason we're engineers is to be innovative. And there's an imagination that comes with that. Um, and a whole ton of problem solving. First thing I ever tell young people who want to jump into becoming an engineer is
mm,
just make sure you have a curious enough mind to want to
mm.
solve a problem,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and work at it. And the curiosity goes a long way. It um, Unfortunately, see, like, well, let me not go the unfortunate part. I'll cover that fork in the
Yeah,
road here
yeah,
just a bit. Curiosity is such a valuable tool, really, when it comes to any field, but in particular when it comes to engineering. Um, the moment we stop being curious is kind of
mm,
the moment we just kind of settle in what we've learned so far and not continue to grow. Um, but I think one area that I have found where folks that uh, I've hired or I've worked with
mm,
who have been really successful in my field is a healthy desire to um, build or be entrepreneurial.
mm.
Um, And what I mean by that is like folks who I don't just want to, sure, I want to build a thing, but I want to build a thing for people.
Mm,
And I want to be able to have that thing help those people. At some point, I want to be able to, potentially build a business out of this thing or build a service or build a nonprofit out of it. Like there's like an entrepreneurial sort of like spirit that I think has always become really valuable. I've Yeah, and if you have that drive, engineering just becomes a tool, just like a hammer becomes a tool to anyone that wants to build.
yeah.
I don't know even know what a hammer's used for. I'm kidding. No, if someone wants to, right, like someone wants to hang something up, or chisel or out of
Yeah.
rock, like it just becomes a
Yeah. Yeah.
tool. It doesn't become the thing,
Mm,
right? And so, encouraging young people to say the engineering degree is not what you're striving for.
yeah.
It's what you can build with it,
Yeah.
right? The career in software engineering isn't the thing. It's what you
Yeah.
can build. Like, what
Mm,
can I build when I've had this? What can I build for my community? What can I build for my family? What can I build for my grandma? I worked at a big tech company for many years, and I worked in a bunch of different products. And I used to have this, I called it my grandma test, products that I would
mm,
work on. And that is could my grandma pick this thing up and use it? Um, because at the end of the day, I want to be
yeah.
able to be like, oh, well, look what I built,
Yeah.
and her be excited and use it.
Yeah.
And there's an excitement about being able to build stuff like that. And so, um, I feel like having that personal drive
Yeah.
to be a creator and to
Yeah.
be a builder, like those things are be important.
Yeah. And that's, there's a couple pieces of, points that I wanted to bring up, which was awesome. It's like, why you're doing this is like, I mean, don't forget why you're doing this. You're
Yeah,
keeping that audience in mind. You're just being super considerate. And that's everything because that will, I don't know, just being so considerate. It doesn't, you keep thinking critically and finding different ways, um, for it to work.
yeah, and for
Yeah,
it to serve, I feel
yeah,
like
there we go.
is
Yeah.
yeah. For me that I mean, and this is part of the passion that we when you first kicked off our question was about what,
Mhm.
and it's can it serve?
Yeah.
And sometimes that's with my family. Sometimes that's with as my mentioned earlier, my grandma test. Sometimes just with my friends. I think of financial management as an area where my family struggled with. I
Mm.
didn't know how to manage finances
Yeah.
because my family didn't know how to manage finances. And so there's a passion in me to be able to either teach people how to manage finances better
Mm.
or build a product that helps them manage finances better. And so, so like those are the kinds of things where it's like my why is, well, the why is why are we struggling as a,
Mm.
as a community to manage our finances? Well, it's probably because of it's probably because we don't know where our money is going. It's probably because we have no idea how to invest. It's probably because we are spending more than we are incoming,
Yeah. Yeah.
more than we're making. It's probably because, and so you start sort of peeling and digging in layers of here. And like I mentioned earlier, there are some niches
Yeah.
in our communities that we can serve to help serve the
Mm.
community. And at the same time, honestly,
Yeah.
build something that we can all be proud of.
Yeah.
And if you're very successful, potentially make a business out of that.
Yeah.
But then watch this, help employ other
There
folks
you go. Yeah.
to help serve them and grow from there.
How seeing you, witnessing you, and at different events, um, be it when you come in or watching sports or at the competition that we were at last year. Um, and this is what I love about you, Alex, is you are you. Um, and part of what I envy and I'm trying to figure out for myself too is um, I don't want to say maybe it comes from gratefulness, I don't know how you do it. Oh, maybe you're gonna have to. Yeah, this is the question that asked us for a secret sauce. How do you balance your work and your personal life? And what I mean by that, though, too, is just how you introduce how you spend time with your family. Um, and of course, you, your wife, your kids, you've all earned that. Like you've all invested and created that space, though, too. Whereas we see other people, and we you mentioned this before, where our benchmarks become like we project and we transfer.
Mm.
Um, I see you, and you never bring your work if you had a bad day coming into after school. You never bring it, right? Or when we're at this event, you're like, "Hey, my son's about to play," and like you're in dad mode, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, how do you not project and transfer when you encounter so much? Um, I mean, do you never stress? Like,
Never. I mean, come on, live in a Silicon Valley and never stress. Absolutely not. No, I mean the truth is that it's
mm,
always around us. And of course, yeah, stress is a big deal. It's a big part of, I think, um, of what oftentimes can drive us either one way or the other, positively or negatively, unfortunately.
yeah,
Um, I, I I have become more comfortable with being vulnerable with who I am. I've become
mm,
more comfortable with bringing myself to wherever I'm going. It wasn't always that way. Um, it, um, yeah, it's interesting because depending on the community that I'm in, I will feel more comfortable or more vulnerable than in other communities that I'm in.
yeah,
Um, and so fluent Spanish speaker. I can speak English obviously fluently. Um, and part of um, there's a certain level of personal comfort I have when I'm with a Spanish speaking community. I live not very far from like I can go to the grocery store and I can speak Spanish to the folks that are in my community, and it's a totally comfortable
mm,
place where I'm at. It's a safe of refuge for me, honestly. And I think part of being vulnerable is having a community of folks that you can always come
mm,
back to say, I am me here. And so what I get to extend out from here to other areas of my life, if they do not accept me, if they do not value or flat out just reject me, I can always come back to a safe space to be able to be who I need to be and sort of refill again. For me,
mm,
there's a few areas where that exists. It's just in my community. Um, like being able to go, like I said, go to the grocery store and speak Spanish, go to the gym, and I have, my buddies there who um, uh, we could just be open with, and I feel comfortable with them,
yeah,
my buddies there. With my family, to be able to be vulnerable with them. I try to make sure that I talk to my mom at least once a week.
yeah,
And by
yeah,
the way, I cannot talk to my, people find this really funny. My mom speaks perfect English. I speak perfect English. We talk in Spanish at a level of respect. When I was a kid growing up, my mom would be like, she'll say something in Spanish to me, papi, ¿quiere comer algo? Hey, you want to eat something? And I will tell her back in Spanish, no, I'm not hungry. And she would um, both verbally and physically smack the mess out of me. I didn't, you no te hablan en inglés. I didn't talk to you in English. Talk to, this a level of respect. So ever since then, I've always had this fear of speaking to my mom in English. And so, yeah, but there's a level of comfort too that's
yeah,
there. Like it's home to me. And I know that that
mm,
community that's there and being able to talk to my mom and being able to stay connected with my family, it gives me a chance to say like, here's where I'm from, and I'm extending outwardly. That means going into, various environments that I'm in. I grew up admiring baseball. I grew up playing baseball on the
mm,
street somewhere. My oldest son, is a really pretty good baseball player. I've never been at the level he's at.
yeah,
Parents that have their kids operating at the same place have played pro baseball in some situations, or at least some college baseball, or coached
yeah,
baseball at some really high level. I don't have that experience. I'm
yeah,
a nerd,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and I've learned to embrace that and
yeah,
be able to, if I feel uncomfortable or if there's some place where that rejection happens,
mm,
have a community that I come back to and get
Okay.
refilled from. That makes a big impact. I feel like for me, it's like a safe space. And if you don't have that, let me encourage you for those who are listening, find that safe space for you.
Yeah.
Find that up, find the community. Maybe it's just one friend that you can just
Yeah.
come back to and be like, oh, I need some affirmation. I need some this. And maybe you don't have a friend. Maybe it's just you. Write yourself some affirmations and tell yourself who you are in the mirror every single day. So that when you go out there, if someone starts rejecting you where you're at, you already know I am a man of God. I am a woman of God.
Yeah.
I am a person of influence.
Yeah.
I am a person of growth. I am right. So like these are the kinds of things that you tell yourself. So when you're out there and rejection does happen, you can come back to where you're at and kind of center yourself a bit. So I don't know baseball all that well when my son was growing in his career as a baseball
Yeah.
player, but I've learned it.
Mm.
I'm comfortable with it.
Wow.
Now I can talk about it. Now I can be a part of it. Now I'm part of that community. And if I'm not, and I need to come back and just be like, no, you know what? You are raising, you're raising a son who is a fantastic baseball player.
Yeah.
You yourself will learn how to encourage him. You
Mm.
yourself will be a great fan for him.
Yeah.
You yourself will serve his
Mm.
team in this capacity. Um, and I think those are just important things where you can just always come back to a center place to just be like, okay, I mean, I know all this stuff. I work with kids who are incredibly smart. Even here, I work with the after school program at the high school that, my kids are at. And these kids are freaking brilliant, geniuses.
Yeah.
And I see you working in a very
Yeah.
similar position
Yeah.
after
Yeah.
school. And, it could be, you're a grown person and you got young people who understand how
Yeah.
to do things
Yeah.
beyond
Yeah.
what we're capable of or even know how to even
Yeah.
study towards. Uh, and so um, it can very easily rattle you and just be like, "Ooh, maybe I shouldn't be part of that." No, you got something to offer. You got something to bring. Um, and so it may not be exactly where they're at, but it is something that I can bring. I could still serve them in some way. In the same way that I can't bring amazing baseball coaching to my son anymore, I could still be a fantastic fan.
Yeah.
I can still be a fantastic video recorder for him. And then I can, make sure that I'm teaching myself and learning the game
Yeah.
enough where I can give him advice when needed, when
Yeah.
he asks for it. Hey, Dad, what did you see anything wrong with my swing? Actually, you were kicking your leg up a little bit too high when doing
Mm.
this, or
Wow.
your arms weren't here, and I've seen you have them here,
Mm.
and you do a little bit, better job at swinging the bat. Um, but that takes again intentionality from earlier, and
Yeah.
effort to do that and to be there for him,
Mm.
to serve his team.
Not yourself. Not your own
Not me.
ego.
Yeah, not my own ego. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, being able to kind of say, well, what am I serving? Who am I serving? Um, and be the best at that.
Yeah. Is there a book that has impacted you
Um,
besides
so many.
Crazy Faith?
No, so in fact, Crazy Faith is good. It's
Yeah.
not like super impactful, but it is
Okay.
a good
Okay.
book. Um, I, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of a more recent one that I've just picked up to see if there's something that's there. Um, Come back to me on that question because I want to think through that a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
All right.
So okay, I do have a few. Let me.
Okay.
The
Okay.
reason I'm struggling is because there's categories of influences for me
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that I want to be really careful of. Okay, for one um, one influence is being able to be very candid
Mm.
and vulnerable and bring kind of myself. There's a book by Kim Scott, which is called Radical Candor. Right, Kim Scott worked at Google for many years. She has since now runs a consultancy firm
Mm.
to teach people how to be better leaders, how to be better influencers, and um, uh, and so she wrote a book called Radical Candor, which talks about how to bring your true, a vulnerable self to any role that you're in,
Mm.
and to offer feedback in that state and a bunch of other things. It's been really influential for me in being okay with being who I am wherever I'm at.
Mm.
Um, and that's been important to me of just knowing that other people um, also struggle with being who they are in certain environments. And this is how they've compensated for that. Or better yet, this is how they've grown through that. So Radical Candor is a really great book. On another level, um, I I learned history through one lens when I moved to
Mm,
the US. I learned American history through the lens of an American historical past
yeah,
that primarily didn't have a lot of people of color
yeah,
when they talked about it, except for in one month, which was February. And then, as Hispanic Heritage Month began to grow in between September and October. But for the most part, it always was one-sided. I remember when I started in college, I had a professor who had us read a book. It was Howard Zinn's um, The People's History of the United States.
mm,
And Howard Zinn, who is this wild-haired, crazy-looking, gray-haired professor, wrote this entire narrative book on um, history from the lens of both the oppressors and those being oppressed,
wow,
and those who um, had culture that already existed, and then those who brought or were then forced their culture on
yeah, wow,
areas of the U.S. And it gave me like this fire to say like, hold on. I know from where I came from when I was in Puerto Rico, when I was learning about history, I learned it this way. And then I moved here and things seemed different. Which one was true? But it showed me that um, uh, if you don't bring the truth, the history, the pieces of where you're at, those things they start getting forgotten, sometimes intentionally. In fact, most times intentionally.
wow,
Right,
yeah,
I'm saying? And then you're not part of the fabric of a culture anymore.
yeah,
All right. And so uh knowing that it's okay for me to be part of the fabric, knowing that
mm,
my story is important to be part of that fabric, is a valuable principle
yeah,
that I want to try to operate from. And more importantly, I want my kids to be able to operate from that too. My story is important to be part of this fabric. The culture that my school has right now, my history,
yeah,
my background, it's important to be part of this fabric. So how do we introduce that? The job that I'm at, um, everyone in my job knows who I am, and I am to some extent by nature a storyteller, but I realize like I have
mm,
to make sure that my story is interwoven
yeah,
into the places that I'm at, so that whatever history and culture doesn't get lost
yeah,
in one way or another. And so, anyways, Howard Zinn early on was a big portion of that. There's a lot of fantastic historical books um, that are looking at American history or wherever country you're
yeah, yeah,
in the lens that is the oppressor,
yeah,
and then
yeah, yeah,
there's historical context that is looking at it from a much larger
yeah,
point of view. And I think oftentimes we may lack that. And so having opportunities to read books like that, boy, like do it.
mm,
Ta-Nehisi Coates, fantastic literary
yeah,
author. Like I love reading Ta-Nehisi Coates because he brings culture into the fabric of
mm,
what already exists. We're
yeah,
operating and walking around it,
yeah,
but
yeah,
there's this like undercurrent
yeah,
of history and culture that you're not a part of, or I am not a part of, or the people that you work with aren't a part of,
yeah,
that they just glance over and don't even consider its effect or its impact.
oof,
You know what I mean? And so there are authors who are there writing about it, sharing their
mm,
experiences, talking through it, talking about their emotions, to introduce the rest of the world to that part of the historical
yeah,
truth that needs to be talked about.
yeah, yeah, because there's implications. There are so many. In fact, we're living in the implications,
Mm.
right?
We're repeating implications from
Oof,
our past. Honestly, if you look at, as a country as a whole, boy, like the number of times that we've repeated what's happening in our country today is pretty amazing. This is a different podcast for sure, but
yeah, yeah, yeah,
but no, I mean, I think that's why it's important to understand the full story. That's why
yeah,
it's important for us to know,
yeah,
as immigrants in some situations, as
mm,
people of color, as non-English speaking um, transplants in some situations. Like
yeah,
we need to know what our influence have been on the community we're at,
yep, yeah,
what influences were intentionally not
yeah,
included into that fabric,
yeah,
um, and make sure that there's a voice to be able to bring that on a
yeah,
regular basis.
yeah, 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 because there are consequences for years to come. We are leaving our fingerprint here.
Mm.
Yeah. Right. Now, in terms of, I would say in your field, because you're producing, you're creating, and you're talking about craft. Um, how do you how do you define success? When do you know enough is enough with this project? When do you learn to let go?
Yeah. Um, so I mean, I work in an industry. Well, I work in an industry. We create products for very specific
Yeah.
groups, and so the stakeholders that I work and partner with help me really define what our what our criteria is for success. So let me start off by saying that I I don't want to limit creators though, just strictly to that. This just happens to be, and this is the case in a lot of larger software companies. But I think as a creator, it's really hard to say when you're done. Honestly, I think one example that has always come to mind for me, um, is Amazon as a company didn't start off as what it is today.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
started off as a very simple bookstore, um, but the vision, right, of what Bezos had was something that's much larger and much greater. And like that's always been the North Star is to be here. It's even beyond where it's currently at, even though it's a fairly, it's a really advanced company,
Wow.
making tons of money. Um, but yeah, I don't think as a creator you're ever truly satisfied with just kind of what you bring to the public. I had a friend of mine um, who started a software company and had a vision for where he wanted to go.
Mm.
He never brought me into that vision until many years later. What he
Yeah.
brought me in was into help with this piece of software where he's like, I want to build this thing.
Mm.
Later on, many years later, I found out this is one of
Yeah.
a giant vision of where he wants to get to, right? And so constantly iterating, constantly like trying to build like the next piece to this thing. But his vision was way larger.
Mm.
Um, People like that are really special. Folks that have a North Star for where they want to be, that
Mm.
is sort of greater than maybe what you can currently see.
Yeah.
It's a gift.
Yeah.
And I think those are special kinds of creators that exist out there. All of us have the ability to do that, but not everyone exercises it
Yeah.
freely enough to be able to operate with that, or um, has been comfortable enough to unhinge or
Yeah.
unbuckle themselves from
Yeah.
limitations to be able to say
Yeah.
like, well, I want to be right. Like that's where I
Yeah.
want to be. I want to eventually be able to, I don't know, whatever, like, um, build something in space or be able to
Yeah.
support uh, passengers traveling
Yeah.
speed of light to, like it's like there's these things where you're like, realistically, those don't even truly exist. I'm a big Star Trek nerd. I'm a big Trekkie, yes. I used to at nighttime uh, turn on Star Trek on my little television and quietly listen to it.
Mm.
What I loved about Star Trek and Gene Roddenberry in particular, who
Mm.
was the writer and creator of Star Trek, was his image for what the world will look like
Mm.
in the 24th, 25th
Yeah. Yeah.
century.
Yeah.
Um, was like novel,
Yeah.
new,
Yep.
different,
Yeah.
unlike what
Yeah.
what we expect it to look like, and even in the era
Yeah.
of what he was writing it in. I mean, Gene Roddenberry was like, and the writers associated with Star Trek
Mm.
were pushing the envelope of what even society looked like now.
Wow.
He could imagine a society where you can have an interracial couple, or even more
Yeah.
specifically,
Yep. Yep.
interspecies
Yep.
couple.
Yep.
Where back in the 50s, 60s, depending on where you're at, that was not possible. It was
Yeah.
beyond what
Oh,
was
yeah.
available and visioned at that moment. And so those people are special.
Yeah.
Um, and if you can get to the point where you can envision something that doesn't currently exist and you can
Yeah.
unconnect yourself from this is what my current reality is
Yeah.
and see a bigger vision of what's possible, That's really valuable. And I think at that point, you're never satisfied with
Yeah,
what
yeah,
you've built out. You just continue to keep driving towards a North Star. I want to be at their one place. I want to be able to have a vision that's that big enough, where I'm like, yeah, we're not quite here there yet. I still light years away from where I see where we want to be. Um, unfortunately, I would say that I feel like I have not yet been able to disconnect myself from my current reality to move past and to be in that place. But I want to be. I want to get to that position where that's where I'm at. And I want to encourage young folks to be able to have a bigger vision and a bigger North Star for where they see technology, their society, their communities be at than where it
yeah,
can be or is right now.
yeah, yeah. Actually, Star Trek had a big effect on me when I came to America. I saw some episodes while I was overseas, in Korea. Um, so this tells you about my generation. Which series is better out of the three? Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, or Voyager?
Oh yeah, no, next generation, absolutely. PNG all the way, baby. Yeah,
I I think the stories are great because there's actual stories. There's a lot of character
yeah,
development. But it's funny how you're talking about how diversity looks in tech in the future because that also plays because
yeah,
I just felt so invested in Deep Space Science because look at who is the protagonist, right?
yeah.
Um,
The Cardassians coming in,
yeah,
and then then later. Anyways,
okay, yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
gonna expose my trekkiness here, but
Um, yeah, and there's other things that you said, and I really, and hopefully our audience embraces that. Like we're all capable. We say geniuses hit the target no one else can see.
mm,
I think the other thing is, uh, are we afraid of success or are we afraid of that path of success? Because it's actually some people are afraid of disrupting the industry because there's consequences to that too. And can you handle the fallout? Another thing too, there's a disruption in your lifestyle, right?
mm,
Or do you have the right support system, a partner or family that understands? And if you bring in your friends along the way, it's a lot. It's a
yeah,
lot.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, music is another area where that's. I'm talking from a tech perspective and
yeah,
from
yeah,
like
yeah,
business perspective, but music
yeah,
is another area. I mentioned earlier on how Spanish and reggaeton music has been like, such a huge influence
mm,
around the world. Bad Bunny winning like Grammy nominations and then the Grammy Awards.
yeah,
Bad Bunny is a young guy from an island somewhere who has a big vision for like what music can be
yeah,
and what partnerships exist. And this isn't like uh, I want you to listen to Bad Bunny. I'm just
yeah,
trying to say
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
creativity and
yeah,
vision will take you far,
yeah, yeah,
and will carve out industries that otherwise wouldn't have existed without some of that. Like, yeah, the partnerships that I think of someone like, like sort of Bad Bunny's influence across music and
mm,
across genres, uh, is pretty amazing.
yeah.
Probably wouldn't have been possible 20 years ago,
No, no,
right?
definitely.
Um, but just like 20 years from now, there's going to be opportunities that will open up for someone who has a vision
Yeah.
for something new than what hasn't existed in the last,
Mm,
2 decades. And so, um, the it's hard to hold on to a vision, I think, sometimes when you've probably fought for it for so long.
yeah.
Um, and then finally, like you've prepared, and uh, it's a opportunity. I think I've heard this. It's like opportunity is when luck and preparation meet. you know, and I feel like uh, you will get your opportunity
Yeah.
to have that. And are you prepared
Mm,
to then operate at that position when you're lucky enough to get that moment?
yeah. Yeah.
And not everyone is. I feel like there's been lucky opportunities for me in particular that I've lost out because I hadn't prepared
Yeah.
well enough to be at that role. And not to say that that doesn't come back around because it
Yeah. Yeah.
does,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But what would have happened if younger in my life I would have
Yeah.
jumped into it and been more prepared.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you spoke to it earlier in regards to resilience. I mean, that's why actually I was going to talk about ethical implications of like cheating and taking shortcuts. You don't want to cheat and take shortcuts because you might come across that opportunity, but you're not prepared. You don't have the
Yeah.
muscle.
Yeah, I mean, if industry's taught us anything, um, they, um, if industry has taught us anything, I think in the tech sector, there has been a huge assumption
Mm,
of what success looks like in the tech industry as a whole, and that assumption has rattled an entire industry in the last 3 years with layoffs happening across the board.
yeah,
And so something we thought we can always bank on forever, and we optimize for that can change in an instant, right? And how prepared are we for potential new avenues that we may cross into? Yeah, artificial intelligence in particular is one of these areas, Gen AI, when it comes to the tech industry, when it comes to white collar roles and jobs and
yeah,
positions. I don't think anyone was ever prepared for it. Like no one even considered that it was possible within most of our lifetimes.
yeah, yeah.
And yet here we are, right? And here we are with generative AI being able to do some incredibly amazing stuff.
Mm,
From uh, create creating videos to putting together scripts to writing out our papers to putting together legal briefs, right? Things we never considered what was possible. Um, and all the implications that come down to that in particular too, um, is important for us to evaluate as a society. Young people who are now, for the first time in a really long time, um, battling with the technology that their parents didn't build, but they're building, and
mm,
the ethical implications of what it means now, where it's not what your forefathers or foremothers have built, it's what you've built. As a parent,
yeah,
I have to ask myself, have I prepared my children well enough to answer those ethical questions
yeah,
in a manner that will serve their future?
yeah, yeah,
Because if I haven't, I've really messed that up. If all
yeah,
I've stressed for them is to take the shortcut, get the big paycheck,
yeah.
exit out of there as quickly as possible, I will tell you that from my
Mm,
principles, that is not where I want to operate from.
yeah,
I want them to have an influence and an impact on their community that's going to be long lasting, that isn't
yeah,
just from a place of extreme wealth
yeah,
gathering, but it's from a place where they can earn and provide opportunities for other people around them. If their ethical questions pop up and it comes up against, um, maybe what societal truths are at that moment, I hope, my prayer is that they're able to make the right choice for their futures.
for sure, for sure. Um, yeah, there's especially in a world where goalposts are constantly being moved and they're telling you, oh, it's okay, it's right here, or you could do this and you could do that. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's easy, maybe not easy. With enough resources, you can be successful in just about anywhere with
yeah,
enough resources.
yeah,
In other words, what I mean is that you could be at some of the most prestigious universities, high schools, colleges. You could pay someone,
yeah, yeah,
like,
no,
uh,
yeah,
and get the degree. And uh, and then what? And then what happens when then the luck and the preparation don't quite exist there? Because it will happen. There's gonna be a moment where you're gonna get stress tested um, with what you know versus um, what you scored. And you know, it may not happen right away,
yeah,
but for those of us that have lived long enough, it will happen. There
yeah,
will be a day.
yeah,
And so, my hope is that when you've prepared well enough, um, that we start seeing decisions being made that won't just impact just your bottom line, but it is going to impact a much broader and greater um, community and um, and society as a future. So yeah,
when you see, how do you how do you not get discouraged? How do you stay motivated and focused, especially when you're not seeing progress as you envision it?
Yeah. I mean, the truth is that I am seeing progress as I envision it
Mm,
sometimes in some situations. Maybe not everywhere.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I've had my own setbacks. My family's had their setbacks. And those suck. I was I've been in the tech industry for 20 years. I was laid off when
Yeah.
this entire big tech massive layoff ha started to happen. I was part of that. Um, I was devastated
Mm,
financially, uh, uh, and also identity wise.
mm,
I have always worked in the tech industry, and so now that I'm no longer working in the tech industry because I've been laid off, my identity is rocked. Who am I?
mm, yeah.
Like, what do I do now? And That became a forging ground to just kind of like ask the question of this is who I was, now who I want to be. Now, it took a few months to get to that point in my thinking.
Mm,
Um, and my kids were a big part of giving me hope. My wife was a big part of giving me hope. Um, my support structure that was there was
yeah,
a big part of giving me that hope, and there's still that. Um, and Knowing who you are,
yeah.
despite of where you're not, is really important. I could be the um, Puerto Rican kid
Mm,
from teenage parents and just kind of stew in that and be there, and that be kind of
yeah,
where I say I'm going to be. Or I can say, my identity is actually something a little bit different than that,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
um, and start striving for opportunities to
yeah.
kind of get to that point.
Well, I see you. I mean, obviously, you're just serving people, helping people, blessing people up. Um, you get energy, and so despite your situation before in the past, or and shared, I attend a fledgling church. It's not we not having resources, but you're like, hey, I helped develop this. I developed this tool for our church and do this, and you're just like, all things are possible. You're just like, hey, this is not the end. This is not the end game. This will
Yeah.
never. You don't let people stew. You said it best. And so, because I think, yeah, because you rose up out of it, and it's always possible. It's always possible to pivot, right, and adapt, but you just can't stay there. Uh,
No, no, and this is where growth mindset becomes really valuable. Yeah,
mm,
there's folks who are just in a fixed mindset to say where I'm at is where I'll always be. Growth mindset says I can grow out of where I'm at.
mm,
Um, and it's less hope based, right? And it's more
yeah,
growth based. So, okay, I'm not where I want to be. And if I was fixed mindset around it, I'm like, well, this is just where I'm going to be. There's no
yeah,
way. Growth mindset says, what can I do to forge forward? Um, and what are some things that I can focus on and work on to be better at something that gets me closer to my goal? I mean, like as an example, this is a really small one, but um, let's say that you're struggling with your finances, mountain of debt that might
mm,
be looming,
yeah,
and zero savings.
mm,
Um, the fixed mindset says, there's nothing I can do about this. I only make X amount of dollars and I have Y amount of debt. And I have zero savings. And so the only thing I can basically do is just continue to be where I'm at, and that's it. That's one way to look at it. The other way I look at it is I make this much money. Um, how much of that am I actually saving for
mm,
myself? How much of percentage am I not using to pay off debt?
mm,
And begin to tackle the mountain of both like these two separate um, areas in my finances to get to a point where I want to be at. It's not going to happen next day,
yeah,
or maybe it does.
mm,
Maybe you get blessed. Maybe that's, your job uh, offers some ridiculous bonus, and all of
yeah,
a sudden, like, where's that going to go? If you have a plan in place of how of incrementally getting to a better spot, even if it's saving $5, even if
yeah,
it's paying an extra $5 on your credit card, like that doesn't account to much in the month, but over time it does. You know what I'm saying? And so um, that's no different. That's an example of money. It's really easy to
yeah,
see that in money, but that's the same thing when it comes to our own education, when it comes to our own growth and the things that we want to learn. I may not know how to write a program or computer program or even know how to do anything generative AI, but what steps am I doing maybe once a month
Yeah.
to get better at understanding that? And so I won't know how to do it right now,
Yeah.
but a year from now, can you imagine what would happen if I just put an extra 1% effort into that?
100, 100. Um, you actually talked about how the ideas you had for yourself because of your environment, right? And what you've seen. Now, once you get established or you get started in the field, what's a misconception people had about you?
Hmm. I a big one, I mean, like I felt like for me, having to prove myself regularly was a
Mm,
common thread.
okay. Okay.
I
Yeah.
always had to prove whether or not I actually deserved to be in the role that I was in. No matter where I went into, I always had to prove it. Even now, I've led engineering teams
Mm,
for a large portion of my career. I have a lot of leadership and industry experience. I built stuff,
yeah.
helped build companies, helped with kind of various areas of areas. Uh, but rarely do I step into a situation where folks don't look like me, where I don't have to prove
Yeah.
all of that all over again to them,
Mm, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I've learned to operate. I've learned to kind of work through that and be willing um, to step through it. At some point, I wish I didn't have to. You know what I mean? And so, but that's an area where I think that as more and more, this is why having folks of different makeup when it comes to leadership teams of different backgrounds, accents, leanings, right? Like uh, gender, but like all these things. When we have a mix of folks, and we've all had to work or prove at some point to get to where we're at, we become less worried about having to make sure that the other person proves where they're at.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's kind of like this idea of uh yeah, I understand the struggle, I've been through it.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna make you repeat that cycle again just for my benefit. I know that
Yeah.
you're here because you've earned it and you deserve it.
Yeah.
Um, and when you look at society as a whole, it's not it's not a one looks like one thing.
Yeah.
They don't look like one gender or one skin color,
Yeah.
one language. My community in particular, probably like I could be walking around my community. I mentioned that Spanish speaking is one of them.
Yeah.
Various dialects of Spanish, various cultures
Mhm.
within the Latino culture exist in my community. There's an Indian community, which is also same thing, various dialects,
Yeah.
various religions, various cultures that all exist. They're there. Um, and yet the companies that they go to and work from, no one in leadership looks like them.
Mm,
No one in leadership have had very similar experiences, right?
yeah.
And so I'm like, that's a disservice to the community that they're coming from. Um, because that's not what we see in our neighborhoods
Yeah.
primarily, at least the neighborhoods I'm choosing to live in. And so, yeah, I mean, like being able to have a diverse workforce and a diverse leadership in particular is so important and so valuable.
Yeah. I just think like it's such a waste of time and resources just to um have to deal with narratives that other people have. And you're like, we're not even starting on this project yet, you
Yeah.
know? So we'll get there. Star Trek Next Generation level, it's just like, hey, let's just we need to go to the next frontier. All right. Let's stop the shenanigans.
That's right. Yeah.
How do you how do you personally handle criticism or disagreement? Or maybe in the context of um when you first got to college and like someone's giving you just feedback.
Mm.
How do you not take it personal?
I think everything you take for feedback wise is always personal. Honestly, I don't think
Thank you for
there's
that
ever
on no, thank you for that honesty. Thank you for that
it's
honesty.
always
Yeah, man.
personal. And but I think part of taking that personal is in asking your question, which part of what they're saying is true and which part of it isn't. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah. Going back to the meat and the bones.
Yeah, exactly. I think when it comes to critical feedback, or any feedback in general, is is recognizing which part of what they're saying is truth but hurts,
Yeah. Yeah.
or not truth and still hurts, or not truth and doesn't hurt. I mean, like there are some things where I can get
Mm,
some really critical or feedback about that makes me feel good, but it's not true.
yeah.
And I have to be careful that I don't overinflate some of that stuff, right? Like I have to know myself well enough. And then there are things that someone will say that are true, but they don't make me feel good. Um, and their delivery may just be foul. The words that they used to deliver it may have been not right, you know. But I think part of it is just like, well, what part of what they're sharing is true?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, no, not all of it feels very good. And I think it takes a level of humility and a level of knowing who you are and an identity of who you are to say, yeah, you know what? I do have a hard time cutting people off when we're in a heated situation. You know what? I do have a really hard time not being stubborn when someone is challenging how I grew up. Oh, you know what? I did come from a family that didn't know how to deal with conflict very well, and therefore I
Mm,
don't know how to deal with conflict. And so
yeah.
when it happens, I become very defensive.
Yeah.
Like these are all things that you begin to know about yourself. And when someone points it out, even in a foul way, you're like, dang, you're right. And I will, man, from experience, I am not quick because I am one of all those three things I just explained to you are things that I have struggled with in my life. And then there's so many more that people have pointed out, and I'm like,
Yeah.
man, forget you.
But I was all right. I'm gonna interject. So, but I think you're good at giving feedback. You know that. Okay. So, for instance, when we were at the competition, it's like you didn't eat. I was like, no, I'm not gonna eat. And you just bring me a muffin anyway. I'm like, man. And you saw me gobble it up in the quickness. Um, 100%. And something you talked about, like how even if they're saying it in a way, the message is coming through a medium that you're not used to. Um, it's okay as long as you're and actually you're being considered like, you know what, that person was probably raised different. They're projecting transferring, but it doesn't mean what they're maybe actually it's their job and they're in a position to give you that info. Now
Mm,
if you never ask for it, it's not their role. That's something different too.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's a thing that I try to share with the folks that um, I have a team. I have folks that report to me.
Yeah.
I do, like I mentioned, coaching and performance management and a bunch of other stuff like that. And there's a phrase that I regularly ask of my team to do for me, and that is okay,
Mm,
maybe you don't necessarily have a lot of strict criticism about how I've done things, but is there some way that I communicated in this meeting that could have made it 10% better? Right? Um, and I think being comfortable enough to ask for 10% better is a
mm,
lot easier sometimes for folks to give you critique
wow.
than if you were like, "Hey, what's wrong with me?" Or my favorite is, uh, "Hey, so I'd love some feedback from you, positive and negative. Just throw it at me, whatever you got."
Okay.
Most people aren't going to be honest enough with you, faced in your face,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
to
yeah.
tell you how they feel about what's going on. They'll tell you all the great stuff. Man, your eyelashes are popping all the time, and every time I see you, you got the this, and man, you're just so encouraged. Blah 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 blah. I
Yeah.
can't think of anything negative,
Mm,
right? But there's a different like this is how we phrase feedback, positive and negative. But there's an opportunity I think that we all have is to grow, to say, how could I do this so that the way that you experience me can be 10% better. Just a minor, like
yeah,
what's
yeah,
it,
yeah, yeah.
you know what I mean? And you'll get some interesting feedback. Like I got stuff, I would ask people like this is kind of a little experiment that I would do.
Mm,
What do you guys think of this meeting that I had? Everybody's like, oh, great meeting. Did a great job leading, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Nothing else? Nope, nope, it was good.
mm,
Next meeting I would have with a different group of folks. And I'm like, hey, so appreciate you guys spending the time. Is there anything we could have done to make the time here spent just 10% better? It doesn't have to be
mm,
astronomical or
mm.
whatever. I got a bunch of feedback. Hey, if we could just maybe cut this down by 15 minutes. This probably could have been an email too, maybe. We
Yeah.
want to make this 100% better, And so like I
Mm,
started getting feedback that was honoring,
yeah.
and not critical of uh, not making other people feel like they're critical of the person that's asking for it.
Wow. Yeah, 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 yeah,
You
yeah.
know what I mean? But instead saying, well, that thing for my time, 10%. That's easy. Here,
Yeah.
just this little thing. If you would have just fixed your mic a little bit so I could hear you better, that would have improved
Yeah, yeah,
things,
yeah, yeah.
you know? And so, or maybe if you could have talk louder, or maybe if you would have just like send us the agenda ahead of time. Like there's just these little things, right?
Yeah.
Where I feel like even when it comes to our
Mm.
personal relationship with folks, looking for opportunities for just 10% better.
I think that's a wonderful perspective because at the same time, it's not that people don't want, we underestimate how considerate other people are actually too. And
Yeah,
that sort of prevents, right, effective communication.
yeah.
What's something that in tech that excites you right now?
So much. I mean, generative AI excites me a ton. What's possible with the I mean, Google in 2001 or 1999 had this vision of saying we wanted to organize the world's information, make it universally accessible. That was a master vision of what they wanted to be able to do. And so they started off with websites.
Mm.
But when you want to make everything in the world universally accessible, there's more information that exists out there. There's stuff that's in books, there's stuff that's on in maps, right? Like we now know this because as we look back now, 24 years later, we start realizing like, holy smokes, I could not live my life. For those of us that grew up in the Google era, I could not have done college. There's no way I would have been able to travel. There's no way I would have been able to purchase things for the right price. There's no way that I would have been able to, and you name off all these things without having this tool in my life. Um, that's changing. Generative AI is no longer me having to do the research for a specific question. Generative AI says I have access to the world's resources and information, all these databases and stuff that have been built out to create now. It becomes a tool or it becomes a tool to create with as opposed to uh, a, just building block foundational things.
Wow.
And I feel like Gen AI in particular is really fantastic. I mean, you can build entire web applications with generative AI. I can tell an application, I can tell a generative AI tool, build me a web app that manages my finances, that keeps tracks of income on a monthly basis, that shows me my spend. It will literally create the code for you for doing that.
I mean, just the
I
way
can
that,
even,
yeah. No, go.
I mean, another one is uh, uh, we we use a ton of we generate a lot of content through Discord, through
That's what, yeah,
Slack,
yeah, 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 yeah.
right? Through social media. Now, being able to then harness that information to then be like ask questions around, hey, how do we solve for this kind of problem within our community? And then have generative AI be able to just like look through all these resources and the way that people talk and the phrases and the way that they problem solve to then distill down a series of answers. It's pretty incredible. Scary, right? Because it means that the data to train it has to be there, and the voices have to be loud enough. There's a tool that my team and I started building recently,
Mm.
just as a fun experiment thing. It's a generative AI thing, where we uh, took all of our code that we've
Yeah.
written, all of our Slack message that people are typing. We took in all of our documentation that exists on things
Mm.
like Confluence and wiki pages. And so we have all of our conversations, our written text, and our code.
Yeah.
Oh, and video. And we've
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
fed videos, training videos. So we'll ask it, um, this problem has popped up with our production infrastructure. How do you solve it? And it gives me 5 or 6 different things that we need to consider when solving that problem. So like, one problem we ran into was how do, if we're going to start up a new web service with a database, what are some considerations we need to think about? And it gave 6 different considerations. Well, you need to consider that there's this, there's scale, there's this, but there's something that one of the engineers who is a very active contributor in our Slacks would constantly say, and that showed up as a top prior, like a top
Wow.
thing to consider. And it's probably fine that it did, but it was interesting that his voice
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
became part of the canon of which generative AI becomes, it just becomes an answer for. So the reason I say that and I stress that is because the what we use to train our information systems with is important. It's
Mm.
valuable. We know where it's coming from, so that things like biases are
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
um, managed.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Are taken into consideration or
Yeah,
just not taking over altogether.
yeah,
Um, there's something that, sorry, that's why I was like, when I was about to interject, it was just like I just had this light bulb moment. And he just went there, and articulated way better than I could. And so, yeah, when the internet, right, started coming out, we're actually, obviously, that I'm not going to talk about how, the growth of technology and that timeline, but you're right. We just kept building and we're just like slapping stuff on. But we're not talking to each other because as we keep building, we have these silos and we're creating more walled gardens,
yeah,
which is wild. But then you're right.
yeah,
It's like you have this, sorry, it's just really brilliant. You have this, what you said, harnessing and then harvesting, right? And distilling, and then it crafts.
yeah. It becomes a partner instead of a tool. That's what the difference is. Generative AI, I code with Gen AI. In other words, what I'm saying is that I make sure that what it's giving me, it's
Yeah.
true. Before, I would look up and then I
Mm,
would make a decision about what's true. Generative
yeah.
AI, it's doing the thing for me, and I'm verifying, validating, and betting that
Mm,
it is true. And if
mm.
I'm not doing that, I'm using Gen AI in a really terrible way. In other words, if I'm just taking what it's
Yeah, yeah,
saying,
yeah, 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 yeah,
it's not cool. So,
yeah.
uh, GitHub, for example, has an AI tool. GitHub is a place where you can store code, and it's where most software developers that worked on either open source projects or even some, many private projects store their code. They're owned by Microsoft, but they have a tool um, that you can integrate into your coding platform so that as you're writing code, it'll suggest recommendations about how to
Mm,
finish the rest of the code. In fact, I
okay.
can even give it a comment, like say I could type a comment that says this piece of code should calculate, interest rate over time. And then it'll just literally create me a function in whatever language that I, s- I've specified it in to write that code. Um, it's a fantastic tool. Uh, but one thing I realize is that I become a reviewer of that code
Yeah, yeah,
more than a writer of that code.
yeah, yeah.
And so it is pretty incredible to consider what that means is that I have to be an expert enough to know that what it's saying, it's true.
Yeah. How do you approach learning something new? I mean, you just seem really open-minded. Are there times where you're not open? Like, are you closed-minded?
Uh, I I'm generally actually relatively open or
Yeah, yeah.
closed-minded. No, it's funny. I mean, no, open-minded. Uh, um, I try to be relatively open-minded, I think, to most things in general. Um, there was, seasons where I wasn't always open to everything.
Mm,
And I had to grow and understand certain things. I have a strength and a weakness of being logical, without always processing things emotionally. And so,
oh, yeah.
yeah, so I process things through my logic before I process things through my emotions, and that is the limiting factor, I think, sometimes. And so, so my logic oftentimes may not leave me open enough to certain things where my emotions might. And so having both are important and valuable.
What's a question you wish people would ask themselves more often?
Um, so I think identity is a big area that we struggle with, I think, as a community and in whole. And a question that I wish that more people would ask themselves on a regular basis is, who am I today? Where am I in this season?
Mm,
Um, and there and ask other people around you that same thing, right? Like rely on the people that you trust to ask that same question. Who do you say that I am?
yeah,
I mean, it's very biblical.
yeah.
You consider the question uh, that Jesus asked Peter, "Who am I? Who do you say I am? Who do other people say that I am?" Um, I there's value in other people knowing who your identity is,
Mm,
and and you being able to operate out of that place. Um, I ask my kids who I am, and obviously I'm dad to them or whatever.
Yeah.
But I also, want to make sure that the only way that they see me isn't just as provider. I
Yeah.
want them to be able to see me as
Wow.
a fan,
Wow. Wow.
right?
Wow.
An encourager, available. Because if they're like, well, who am I? Well, Dad, you're always busy. You
Mm,
you work really well, but you're always working.
mm,
Like it's kind of, in my opinion, for me, it's a backhanded compliment. It means that I work hard, but it means that they don't get the time that they need, right?
yeah.
So recognizing that is important. It then gives me a little bit more intentional effort to be what they need me to be.
Yeah. How do you see your work impacting society in the future?
Um, so I define my few different areas of work. One is, well, there's my job.
Yeah.
And I'm in a position now where I coach people.
Mm,
My goal isn't to coach them so that they're better for the company. My
yeah.
goal is to coach them so that they're better for themselves and forever they end up at. We are a stepping stone
Yeah. Yeah.
in their career. And I think when it comes to software engineering in particular,
Mm, yeah.
um, you know, people aren't commodity. People are people.
Amen. Yeah.
And so my role, whether or not my company is saying it, is to train the folks around me and coach them to be amazing, whether they're here or whether they end up somewhere else.
Yeah.
Be incredible software developers, be incredible mentors, be amazing managers, leaders, directors, VPs, CEOs, wherever they eventually end up. And if I can do that in my job, I've done a service. In my family, um, very similar, right? Like I want them to know that they can be who the best version of who they want to be, and get to that point, and it be a safe place if they're not there yet to come back home
Mm,
and get the affirmation from me and my wife and from their family.
I love that. I love that they can come back home.
Yeah.
Um, what's a dream or goal you're immediately working towards right now?
One goal is my health. As I get older and older, I'm beginning to realize that my health is something I can't buy.
Yeah.
It's an investment and it takes time and it takes energy. I mean that very, very literally.
Yeah.
Um, I my health in particular hasn't always been important to me because it was easy,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
I uh visually someone would look at me and say, "Yeah, you're healthy. Like no problem there." But and for a long time, my body was really good at taking care of itself.
Yeah.
And as I get older, and as all of us get older, you'll
Yeah.
begin to realize your body isn't good at doing that anymore if you haven't invested
Yeah.
in it early on. I don't care how healthy you have been through high school and college, healthy looking. If you haven't invested in that,
Yeah.
the long-term gains aren't going to be there, And so if I don't have a healthy diet, if I don't have a healthy regime to working out and moving my body, if I don't have a healthy um, way of like physically moving myself, my body is going to break down in areas where much sooner than it should.
Yeah.
And so a goal for me is to be healthier as I approach my 50s and 60s than I was in my 20s and my 30s. So, and it's biblical too. I mean, I think of Caleb in the Bible. Caleb in the Bible, he was in his 40s when he went into the promised land,
Mm,
or when he was. It was, let me say it a different way. He was in his 40s. He didn't get into the promised land. He was in his 80s,
mm.
but he was as healthy as he was at the beginning. And I'm like, how did that happen? Whatever it is, I want that promise in my life. I want to age in reverse.
Mm. Yeah.
And so I've been trying to very actively be um, physical, work out regularly, eat much cleaner, be aware what my body feels, and operate out of that place. And that to me is an important aspect of my lifestyle. My family knows that that's the case,
Mhm.
and I try not to have anything else sort of like bump that out of its priority when it comes to my own physical health.
All right, we're down to the last four questions. Um, these next three, pretty existential. Um, just to give you a heads up. All right. What is grief?
What is grief?
Grief. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, so yeah, let me think through that just for a second. What is
Mhm.
grief? Um, we all experience it, even if we don't always process it. So
Mm,
um, grief is an emotional, it's what happens when you have um, severed from something you've known to always be available or true. So there's an emotion that's attached to that. That emotion is generally grief. That happens at the physical level. Obviously, we grieve when we've lost people.
mm,
Um, I don't necessarily just mean because of death. It also is because of moving. It also is because of connections. It also is because of broken relationships. Like grief, you can have, you can experience it, and it's not simply because of death.
yeah.
You can also have grief when it comes to realizing who you weren't anymore, who you aren't anymore, right? Like when you've separated from something, there's an emotion that gets attached to that you're like, I don't know how I'm feeling, but I feel angry because who I was, I'm not that person anymore. I can't do these things anymore. There's a moment of
Mm,
grief, and I think sometimes we don't embrace that enough to heal through it to
yeah.
then say, okay, now I'm in a better place. So as an example, let's say that you're an athlete. And then years later, you realize I can't do the same things that I'm there now. And so you do a few things. You punish your body
Mm,
to try to do the things that it was doing, um, or you begin to fill the void with something else to
mm,
try to get that same feeling, that same sensation you had with it when you were an athlete and the winning and the competition that was there. Or the last thing is you fall into a place where you're like, I can never do that again. And so therefore there's a feeling of depression that's there. But if folks were to deal with that loss
mm.
and work through the emotion of grief there, they would begin to get to a point where they start to heal from that and say, that was my then.
This
What
is
is
what I
my
am right now.
now? So grief comes from that separation, sometimes physical, oftentimes emotional. It doesn't always have to be a person.
What is love? Platonic or romantic, however you want
Yeah, yeah. Love is a very simple word in English. It's a
to.
very complex word in other languages. I think of what, Jesus in the Bible talks and it says, asks the question, do you love me 3 different times? But if you read it in the original form, he asks it with 3 different words, all talking brotherly love, um, uh, uh, brotherly love, eros, and then finally unconditional love. And so there are various levels, I think, when it comes to love. Actually, oh my gosh, author, last name is Bell. She wrote a book, All for Love, I think is what it's called. As I'm talking, I'm going to look it up.
Okay.
Um, and Bell Hooks, All About Love.
Bell hooks. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, and bell hooks can be controversial depending on kind of the school of thought that you're on. But bell hooks,
Yeah.
this is a book that actually my wife is reading right now, and so she's given me the TLDR on it. But she writes how we have a very skewed idea of what love is
Yeah.
in our society. Um, but love is one of these things that we don't actually know how to do it well. Love is an action word. Love is a lasting,
Yeah.
um, and I think I don't think we've always experienced it. So as a result, we don't always know how to give it.
Mm,
Our families have operated and said, "I love you," and then done things that don't seem very loving,
yeah.
and then we turn around and do the same thing, and so we've never really truly
Mm,
been in that place. Um, yeah, um, love provides a safe space, a safe place to be able to be and operate who you are. Provides safe wording, safe words, um, provides truth. I think sometimes we think of love as Sometimes we think of love as a feeling, and it's not just that.
What is the meaning of life?
These are very existential questions. Let's see, meaning of life. Um, I saw this really great example on, I don't know, some sermon or some message somewhere where it talked about how there's this giant rope at one end is just like a small painted red version of what we kind of see as our life. And then there's the rest of eternity, which is like the rest of this 10-foot long rope that exists out there.
Mm,
And I think oftentimes we measure our life based off of our current existence of where we are here on this world. And our life is so much greater than that. There's a big influence and impact that we have in our families, our communities. There's echoes of who we are. At least that's the hope
yeah.
that transcends us and our quote unquote physical life. Um, that I think if we embrace that this moment that we have to be in this community,
Yeah.
that's the echo that you set from that point
Mm,
forward.
yeah.
Hopefully, it helps us make wiser, more ethical decisions about what we do, because our life, like our physical life, as it's defined medically, it only lasts for so long.
Yeah.
But our impact and our influence in that life can and does go on forever. I mean, like I had a pastor who used to say, "The buck stops with me." So what that our family lineage has always dealt with
Mm,
pornography. So what that we've always dealt with poverty. So what
yeah.
that we've always dealt with violence.
Mm,
The buck stops here with me.
mm,
I'm changing the echo of my family
mm,
from this point forward, um, and I'm going to dedicate my life to changing that echo,
yeah.
so that lives that follow behind me, or rather after me, benefit from that.
Perfect transition. What advice would you give to young people, the next generation, especially those in high school and seniors?
Um, it is early in your life. You do not have to make a decision right now to what the rest of your life has to be. Um, 20 years ago, um, the world looked different than what it looks today. And 20 years ago, we couldn't have ever imagined that it looking the way it does.
Yeah.
There's industries that it don't exist yet that won't ever exist until for a while.
Yeah.
And be and know that that's the case.
Yeah.
Prepare for being the best version of you. So regardless of what the industry looks like, you can apply yourself to that. And what I mean by that is that um, make decisions that um, can impact your greater community, the community um, that you're a part of, that can impact the community that your friends are a part of, um, and um, and uh, and dream. I mean, like I earlier we talked about just kind of setting north stars and dreaming for
Mm,
something that's bigger.
yeah.
Y'all are setting the pace for where things are going to be. Embrace that and own that and drive it. Um, I love the creativity I see young people kind of operate at. Um, and I think that it's important to understand that you influence and your contribution to community and to generations to come starts now.
Sure. Alex, thank you so much for being salt and light. Um, I felt the salt and light, and I'm pretty sure whoever's listening and watching, I'm pretty sure they got something out of it. And if they don't have a model of joy, growth, hope, faith, work, um, they do now. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll try to have you on next time
All
soon.
right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Alex.
Appreciate y'all. All right. Bye now.